welcome to On the Bobble Podcast, episode 69. I'm your host, Tsubasa J. Ueda, and with me is my co-host, Yuki Lee Bender. Today, we're going to be talking about value-neutral plays and on-hits today, so it's going to be another fundamentals episode. Before we do that, how was your week, Yuki? You played PQ season as well this week?
Yeah, my week's been pretty good. I had a pretty successful PQ weekend, I guess. I played KO on the Saturday and came in top 4, and we ended up splitting the gold foil amongst top 4. Still played it out from there. I lost in semis. Yeah, pretty good. Got a quarter of a gold foil, which I was pretty happy with. Girlfriend qualified for Amsterdam, which was cool. So congrats to Ellie. And then the next day on the Sunday, I won the PQ on Dory. So I think I was kind of locked on Elo anyways, but I am definitely locked now, I guess, for Amsterdam. I split a gold foil in what might have been a favorable matchup for me, but I had never played it and I was kind of tired and I was just like, I'm pretty happy to just split. It's fine. So we split the gold foil, and I don't really regret it because, yeah, I didn't know the matchup and I thought it might be bad. So, yeah. But anyways, I played Hatchet Story. The finals was against a Victor, and I was like, I don't know how to play against Guardian. Sounds hard. And then I played it, and I'm like, oh, this is not that hard. This is actually pretty good for me. Maybe I should have tested, but that's okay.
Yeah, you don't need to take away all the gold foils from the locals, right? Do you know which gold foil you guys opened, or did you guys keep it sealed?
We're gonna sell it sealed. It's kind of sick that Eric and Ian also won our other local PQ. Ian also tests with us. Oops. Troop Waffle doing pretty good, at least locally.
Definitely one of the strongest players in the local community for sure. So not too surprised that you guys are taking up all the gold foils in our area at least.
Yeah, no, for sure. Pretty good season. How did your PQs go?
I actually only played the one on Saturday, and I ended up playing Dash IE. I was playing the Fatigue Do Nothing deck. I ended up top 8ing and losing to Clay in top 8. The game was super close in Swiss when I played against Clay in Swiss. And then in top 8, he destroyed me no waiting. It wasn't even close. Blood Rush Bellow is a good card.
I see. Yeah, when you're trying to block, Reiner can really just be like, nope, you're dead. He's quite good at that. And he can also blow up your items potentially. So I do think that can be a tough matchup. I realized that because we had already talked about it a bit, like a text message in the Discord. We also played at that PQ during Swiss though.
Oh, did we? Oh, yeah, we did. Yes, we
Yeah,
did.
we
We
did.
definitely did.
It feels like we already talked about it, and it was a while ago. But we actually haven't talked about it on the podcast yet, so we should talk about it. That game was kind of bad, but it was fun. We were playing in Swiss. What was our records? Were we like 2-1? It was like kind of an important match where it like didn't eliminate the other person, but like you wanted to win, kind of a thing.
No, I wanted to win for ELO purposes for sure.
Hmm.
And then I don't think it kind of mattered. I think we're both
locked for top 8, right?
Yeah.
So it was just like playing for placement, but I'm just
Yeah.
like trying to not get juiced on Elo.
Exactly. So like I'm trying to win like 5 or 6 ELO points from you. Yeah, and then if I lose like 1 or like 1.5 or something like that.
Yeah. It's very sick, and that was quite the game. I think it was kind of bad. I was super ahead. Took a number of risks that I probably didn't really need to take. Like I had a smashing performance and a cast bones in hand and an agility, and I'm just like, and like another card. So I was just like, I smashing performance for 6. It's pretty like I'm like only 33% to discard the cast bones. It still comes in for 6, and I get to like do another attack. But the attack that I got off the top was like really bad. I think it was just like a blue. And then I discarded the cast bones, and I was like kind of like out of cast bones and didn't blow up an item, which ended up being like worse than I was like, it's not that bad. And I was like, yeah, it really is that bad. I probably should have just overpitched the cast bones and had it in my deck for second cycle, because this game almost goes to fatigue, partially because I like lose damage there, and I also roll a 1 later, which I also probably didn't need to do. I think had I just like played the more conservative line that doesn't blow up both those times, the game probably wouldn't have been that close. But I did,
Yeah, like Yuki was ahead by like maybe like 10 points at this
Yeah.
time. And I'm just like, I kind of don't know how my deck ever comes back against a deck that keeps on swinging like 13-point hands kind of thing. I just like don't have a way to come back into this game. And then she just like, does nothing for 2 turns. And I'm just like, well, that's my 14 points of damage I needed to come back in this game.
Yeah, it was kind of bad. And then like I was getting fatigued because I think I discarded a blood rush to like a pulping or something. Of course I discarded the cast bones to the smashing performance as well. So I was just kind of like out 2 power cards. And I was like getting fatigued pretty badly. In fact, so badly that I almost wanted to just scoop up my cards because I was just like, I'm dead here. I'm like tanking. I'm trying to be like, I think you're at like 2, and I'm tanking, and I'm just like, man, is there a way to get this smash instinct to like make the intimidate, make it so I can leak damage, but like I can only like claw for 4 smash instinct, which like it wasn't good enough. I think he might have had like a point of armor as well or something.
Yeah, I think so.
I just like couldn't quite get enough damage. I was just like a little bit short, and I was just like out of cards in deck. But I don't scoop. I play it out because I always play it out. When there's stakes, I just play it out no matter how bad it is, and I just do that because that's the best I can do. I do claw for 4, attack for 6, and or something along those lines. Maybe it's claw for 5, attack for 6. Anyways, I do that, and I win. Um, because Jay cast Sift on the previous turn because he knew he had pitched 2 plasma purifiers and he wanted to sift into the plasma purifiers and pitch them away so he didn't have no blocks in his hand. But he was off by a little bit, so he sifted so that they were in his next hand and he had 2 no blocks in hand. So I killed him with my like Mopey 9 damage turn.
Yeah, that was really bad by me. So typically I would have like kept track a little bit more closer, but like would have known a little bit better. But then for some reason I just like blanked and I'm just like, okay, I sift here and I draw 2 plasma purifiers. And then I played sift, drew 2 cards, and it was 2 blue 3 blocks, and I'm just like, I think I killed myself, but I'm trying to keep a straight face just to just so that Yuki might like give up and like make some bad play or something and not realize I have 2 plasma purifiers in hand. But no, she just like complain. I can't kill you. 5, and I'm like block for 6. And then she just goes in the tank after attacking me for 5 of 2 plasma purifiers in hand, trying to not say anything just in case she passes. And she was like, okay, last thing I can do, 6. And I'm like, you got me. My only non-3 blocks in my deck, essentially, was a 2 plasma purifier left. I accidentally sifted into it. If I just didn't play the sift and, like, did just nothing that turn, I would have won the game. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, he could have passed the turn and he would have won. Pretty funny.
No, it cost me 8 elo. Playing sift cost me so much elo.
Yeah, we both just played kind of bad, honestly. And it does happen. Mistakes do happen. It's also kind of funny because my game on Axis Dory and the PQ that I won the next day into Ian, our local, and my teammate, he was on KO. And the game was kind of similar. I was like a full like 10 to 12 points behind life totals, just like consistently. And I was getting to the point where like I was at like, God, I was so low. I think I was at like 7, and I had no equipment aside from my dynamos, of course. And he had like a blood rush pitch stacked in his deck. And I'm just like so dead. I'm like behind on fatigue as well. And his deck just like has a bunch of windups. So he can just like claw attack me over and over and over again. And I'm like, I think I'm far enough behind that like I can't beat claw attack because I need to like keep 2 cards to be able to do my dynamo thing. But like I'm leaking damage every time I do that. And I'm just kind of like slowly dying. And if I just block, I get fatigued. I can't, even if somehow I don't get fatigued, he has this blood rush there, a pitch stack blood rush there. That's just going to kill me. So I'm just like super dead, kind of no matter how you cut it. And he rolls a 1. Previously, he rolled like a 6. I think he only needed a 4, but he like rolled a 6. And hit me very hard, and that was part of why I was so far behind. And then I think he like discarded a Blood Rush to like a Bear Fangs or something. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a Bear Fangs. So he just like lost 3 points of value, lost a Blood Rush, and I guess he got like kind of nervous or like kind of tilted, and he like rolled a 1, and then like my hand just happened to be super sick. Like I think I had like a 16, 17 damage hand kind of a thing, where it was just like I had no business being able to keep this hand, but like he rolled a 1, and then I just like happened to have like a really sick hand. I get to do like triple hatchet swing with like a red hit and run. It's like that kind of a turn where it's like really good. It's like 2-9-3 or something, trigger my dynamos. And I'm just like suddenly back in the game. And I end up just like barely getting there in an end game. But like KO's a hard deck, man. Like the deck is so good and so consistent, and like even your floor when it's bricking and doing bad shit like discarding the cards that you want, like you're still often just getting like 12 points out of your hand, and it's like kind of okay. Or like 11 points out of your hand. But you can also just kind of like self-destruct with scabs, and it's like weird because you can like win games with scabs. Like I also like won a game against Ellie, or no, I almost won a game against Ellie with scabs where like if I had rolled a 6, or sorry, if I had rolled a 4, I would have just won because I could just like hit her and take away cards. But I didn't roll a 4, I rolled a 2, and I just lost. Because I've been like stranded with cards because there was an attack reaction that I thought was a Valiant Thrust, and I got kind of blown up for it. But yeah, like I almost won because of scabs, and then rolling it when you don't need to and you're just too far ahead and you just like die can also just like completely cost you the game. So it's like a weird deck where you like have this variance factor that you can use, and it's definitely correct to use it sometimes, but you can also definitely use it where it's like this is plus value if it hits, but I'm just like giving myself a chance to lose a game that I was like probably never going to lose because my deck is consistent enough that like if I just play the consistent hand, I would probably just be fine.
Yeah, trying to figure out when to roll scab skins is a very difficult puzzle. I think it's not just the value math that you have to do, because like sometimes if you look at it in like the bigger picture, it might just be like, oh, if you roll a 1, it loses you the game, and then six might win you the game. But like if you just don't roll that at all, you were like already winning the game. So like there's no need to roll the scab skins, even if it is like positive in value. It's like I think this applies to every TCG, but life and value and everything is just like a value that you can work with. It's not something like to win the game. You just need to put your opponent to 0, and you don't need to have 20 life on them. You just need to have 1. So there's no need to win the game by like having like 15 more life than your opponent. You just need to win with 1 life. So if rolling the scab skins like gets you like 4 points extra value, and now you're gonna win the game with like 10 life instead of 6, it's like that was a kind of a useless roll, right?
And it can be hard to predict like where you are at and how ahead you are. I do think it actually kind of ties in nicely with our end games episode a couple weeks ago that where we talked about like kind of game states and going from the middle game to the end game and making decisions in those kind of spots. I think that's like also something you're kind of doing, and like evaluating how good that position is when you're in it is a thing that we talked about a lot. And this is kind of like part of why it's important is you're understanding like when is it just like scab skins gives me a 50% chance to like create an action point out of thin air and win this game that I shouldn't be able to win, and I should definitely be rolling because I'm just like dead without it, to like the opposite extreme of like I'm actually so far ahead I don't need to roll, and rolling is actually lowering my chance to win this game and giving my opponent, even if it's only like a 17% out or whatever, it's like that's like a 17, like it doesn't matter how low the odds are if it happens, and then like once it happens you're just like, oh, like I'm like very behind now, or this game is really close now, when like it just didn't need to be close. Like you are so far ahead that like so long as nothing went super bad you were going to win. But it doesn't always feel like you're that far ahead, so that's kind of why it's tricky. You don't always recognize it.
Yeah, mostly in Flesh and Blood because like this game swings really hard depending on what kind of hand you draw or what kind of hand they draw. So yeah, it's tough. This game is really tough to figure out. I think the best way to figure that out is to play test as much as you can and like know which matchups can swing at what life totals. You wanna just get right into our main topic then and talk about the value neutral plays?
Yeah, I think that's it's kind of like a great transition for us. So today we're talking about two things: value neutral plays as well as on hit effects, and kind of like how to value those and how to make decisions around those. Um, and it sort of ties in with our end games topic and like game states and all of that. So it's going to tie in nicely with some of the other content we've been doing. If you haven't listened to that episode, I encourage you to do so. Go back, but you could probably listen to this one and the other one. I don't think the order matters. Um, but yeah, good resource for you. So value neutral play, what are we talking about? We're talking about plays. So we talk about value when you present damage and you block, you add those two numbers, and the total damage prevented plus the total damage dealt is the value you got out of that hand. So if you block for 6, you attack for 8, that's 14 points of value. If you attack for 13, that would be 13 points of value. You block for 12, that's 12 points of value. That's sort of like value math 101. And it's super important, but then like you wind up in these spots where you're just like, well, I can attack for 6 or I can block for 6. It's the same number, right? So what does value tell you? Value tells you, well, they are both equally as good. I think that's kind of like almost never the case. They're never going to be equally as good. They're probably close. If they're the same value, it's like you probably can't go like too far wrong, kind of. You also kind of can go wrong. Like I think that there's often a better choice, and that's sort of like one of the hardest things in Flesh and Blood is you have these plays and you're like, these are both 6. One isn't like obviously higher value than the other, but like I don't know which one I'm supposed to do. It's like the classic Guardian. Like, do you Anathos for 6 or do you block for 6? So that's kind of like what value neutral plays are.
Then what do you do to like differentiate between these value neutral plays? Like I guess Guardian is the easiest example. Anathosing for 6 or blocking for 6. What would be your number one thing that, makes you decide which play to make?
There's kind of like a few things that I think about. One of the big ones, does your opponent want to block with some card? Certain decks wish to block with cards to get value out of them. So for example, Fatigue Dash or Victor, Victor, most Guardians cannot use their whole hand. So sometimes just like taking damage to send back 6 is actually just like letting them get value out of cards they otherwise wouldn't get value out of. Some of the warriors can be kind of the same way. They kind of want to block with 2 cards. And so sometimes you're actually getting more value by blocking out and not giving, and then just being like, show me that you can use all 5 of your cards. And if you don't, you just like, you just like lose a card for every time that I do that. Whereas if I just do the 6 and you throw 6, you're like always getting something that's value neutral. But if you just like block 6 and don't send back the 6, you might like, they might not get that extra, like those 2 extra cards that they blocked with might actually cost them nothing. Like if their best play was Spinal Crush and they don't want to Arsenal a blue because it's like a bad blue, then like taking 6 to throw 6 and then they just get to block with 2 cards they didn't want and they didn't want to Arsenal, you're actually just like giving up 6 life for nothing. So if they want to block, it's often better. If they're a class that wants to block, it's often better to not be attacking.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And sometimes if they're a class that like does like that prefers to attack, it can be good to attack if you're like trying to race them. So if your goal is to like make the game shorter, then you want to like trade life with them. But if you're trying to make the game longer, then you'd rather block. So there's kind of like also that dichotomy.
Does the number of power cards your opponent have kind of matter here as well? So, like, I guess a good example would be like KO with like Blood Rush Bellows or like Cast Bones. If they have a lot of those kinds of cards, does it make you want to attack more or does it make you want to attack less?
I guess I tend to. It kind of depends. Again, it kind of depends on the game. So if you're trying to shorten the game, I think it really comes down to like, are they like out of power cards, and that means that you can then like block, and you have the chance to like maybe like attrition them out. which is like not easy to do, but I think that is like maybe possible. Like that's something that you need to evaluate versus like I guess like the opposite where they're like due for drawing power cards. They haven't seen them soon, and you're like hoping to kill them before they draw all their blood rushes. I think that can be like a factor. So I guess the ones that we talked about is like, does your opponent want to block, and are you just giving them extra value out of their cards? And are you trying to make the game longer, or are you trying to make the game shorter? And that could tie into the power cards that they have left. If they're behind on power cards, maybe like drawing into your power cards means that you're winning, and vice versa. If they're ahead on power cards, you might want to shorten the game and make it so that they can have less time to draw all their power cards and catch back up to you on power card.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing that I typically, it's not like I aim to do because my dash deck always just blocks all the time. But one thing that I kind of find it naturally playing out is when I do play my dash deck against someone like KO or Reinar, they usually end up with like 5 cards, like 4 cards in a hand, 1 card in arsenal quite often. And it tempts my opponent to roll scab skins a lot more often than not. And it's actually kind of like one of my outs is that they roll the scab skins and like try and use up their whole hand. Because if they do roll a 1, then I can actually like start putting counters on my cards and then start racing them back. But then if they never roll scab skins, I'm kind of in this like semi-doomed spot of like, oh, they can just keep attacking me for 13, which is like just good enough to rip all my hands apart. And technically in fatigue math, KO and Reiner is kind of good at fatiguing Dash. Mostly if they can have like one smashing performance or like one ARG smash to blow up one of my items once, like I kind of can't fatigue them after that.
Yeah, I've had games where I just like take both the chambers with smashing performances, and Dash is just like, I have like a Titan's Fist.
Yeah, maybe a Titan's Fist. It might just be a Mandible Claws.
No, you pitch a blue, you get 2 plasma purifiers, and then your pistol shoots for 4. You have literal Titan's Fist. You have a Titan's Fist, Mandible Claw split card, so technically pretty good.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
But there's a lot of like calculated risk and whether or not you need to take that risk. And I guess it's like kind of a default. I think that blocking is often slightly better than attacking because even if your opponent is an aggressive deck, they may just have extra cards that they get more value out of blocking with. Like you think about like Katsu. Katsu is an aggressive deck, but if Katsu has a hand of like 3 blue 2 power attacks, like they want to block with 2 of those, you know. And you're just kind of like giving them the chance of like, if you have your pop off turn, you're just going to take 6 and then I go value neutral. And you're just going to pop off anyways because you don't care about 6 vanilla damage. You don't care about my Anathos. But if your hand sucks, then you're just like up 6 life. So you're like kind of giving your opponent like an out to do that. And like you don't necessarily like, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're falling behind because you still technically are trading like 6 and 6 and they're probably getting like 12 out of their hand. So like the game goes on, but you're just like kind of 6 life behind that you like didn't need to be behind. And like it's tricky because like sometimes you like leave them with cards and they just like hit you really hard. But just like keep in mind that like when the best case scenario is that you go value neutral, and then there's like other times where you're just like giving them extra value out of their cards, it's like often you're better off just blocking for 6 rather than attacking for 6 is like kind of the TLDR. Like technically it does matter how like healthy your deck is versus your opponent's deck and all this kind of stuff, but like all things equal, you kind of want to block 6, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think fundamentally in Flesh and Blood, action points are a resource that's kind of hard to come by, and to play your cards, you need to have action points. It's not easy to like get action points and convert all the cards in your hand on the offense.
Yeah.
Like I think KO might be like a Reinar. The Brutes are a good example for this. It's like the reason why they're rolling scab skins is because they can't convert their whole hand, and that also means that if they don't roll, they don't convert their whole hand, and you get value that way. So
Mhm.
it's like if you just don't attack some heroes, they have a hard time converting hands. At the same time, like, if you never attack your opponent, you're never winning, so you do have to attack them.
Yeah.
But if it is for like a smaller number, like 6, and there's no on hits, and which is also the reason why we're going to be talking about on hits next, it makes letting your opponent maximize their hand while yourself not maximizing your own hand is going to be a problem. So you want to make sure that not only are you maximizing your own hand, but devaluing your opponent's hand as much as possible. And I think that's where we want to get at today.
Yeah, it's sort of like you're getting, like, no matter what you do, you're getting 12 points of value. Do you want to give your opponent a chance to get like 15 value out of a hand that like maybe they could have only gotten 9 with if you didn't let them block? Probably not, right? So that's kind of the thrust of it.
Before we talk about on hits, is there any other consideration for value neutral plays?
I think the other big one is fatigue, and if fatigue is on the table, because typically the one big advantage that attacking has over blocking is that it is almost always better to attack in terms of fatigue math. With Anathos, that is certainly true. You're spending 0 cards in deck to swing Anathos for 6, and your opponent has to like give you 2 cards if they want to stop it. So you're kind of going like up 2 cards every time you do this. Or even if you're throwing like just like a literal brutal assault, like a 2 for 6 attack, you're still trading like 1 card for like 2 cards worth of damage if they're trying to block. So attacking is like better in terms of fatigue math if you are fatiguing by damage, or if there is a chance to fatigue by damage that game. If it is something that you're pressuring in the game, then throwing 6 or throwing 7 can be very, very important. That's sort of like the other side of it. But there's also like lots of matchups that will never go to fatigue, and I think in those matchups, if it's value neutral, you're often better off blocking for the reasons that we talked about. So yeah, all of what we said is true, but if fatigue is a consideration, you need to be doing some attacking or you just fall behind in fatigue. So that is like something that can be, honestly, this comes up a lot in limited, I feel, where if you just sit there and block, you just kind of fatigue. There's like almost always a deck in limited that can fatigue you.
Yeah, that is very true. That is very true. Is there a specific point in where you start thinking about fatigue? Like if it's like a matchup like in CC where it can go down to fatigue, when do you start thinking about fatigue?
Honestly, I think about fatigue before the game starts, and I'm kind of evaluating it throughout the entire game. I think we could do like an entire episode on this almost, but I'll try and give you like the short version of it. Some of it is matchup knowledge. So if they are playing Oldhim, even if they're a more proactive Oldhim, they always can fatigue me. This is like a part of the deck and part of what makes it strong. And it's just something that's like on the table is you have to beat them before you fatigue or you just lose. And they can also just like play a value game with you as well at the same time. And it's kind of like why the deck was so good. But that's something that you need to know is like, is your deck prone to fatigue in this matchup? And if yes, then you need to kind of from the start of the game, budget your resources and make sure that you're getting as much value out of them as you can so that you can win before you fatigue. But if it's a matchup that never goes to fatigue, you should just do the most value efficient thing every single time. So if you're playing like a Katsu mirror, you can't really realistically fatigue the other person because they always have Kodachis and you just like hit each other really hard and you don't block that well or have that much armor. So like fatigue is not really a consideration. And often you just want to have more life so that you can survive their combo and find more time to get your combo. So again, you'd rather block rather than attack. So it is important to understand if fatigue is on the table at all. And then when you identify, yes, this is a matchup that fatigue can happen, I'm always thinking about it in terms of like how ahead or behind I am on fatigue. So it's like, am I getting closer to, so like if I've spent like 1 blood rush and they've taken a bunch of, I feel like we talked about this on the end games episode a little bit, but if I've spent like 1 blood rush and they're down like 15 life and I still have like 2 more blood rushes and like maybe they've used some armor, like I'm doing like super good in terms of fatigue because I know that I still have like 2/3 of like the damage potential in my deck left and they've lost more than 1/3 of their life. And similarly, if you've like taken away like only like 5 life and you're like 1/3 of the way through your deck and you've gone through a blood rush and they still have all their armor, you're kind of in trouble in terms of fatigue because you've spent a lot of resources in your deck and you haven't gotten much progress. Keep in mind that like D-reacts are an asset too. So working through like all their sync belows and stuff, like if they draw their sync belows early, that will make it harder to do damage. So that's like another asset that they have in their deck that you kind of need to evaluate. But yeah, I think I'm often thinking about like I am ahead on fatigue relative to how many resources I have in my deck, or I'm behind on fatigue. And if I'm behind, I will set up those cards more and get maximum value to try and go over because I'm very at risk of fatiguing. And if I'm ahead on fatigue, I will play a value game. And I will just say, okay, play a value game with me. You can't outvalue me. Or like I'm going to make it hard for you to outvalue me. And fatigue isn't an option. So yeah, and that's kind of like the preferred spot to be, honestly. When you just get to play like a value game into a fatigue deck, and you just go, I'm never going to fatigue because I'm just going to kill you with inevitability. So you have to play a value game with me. That's like often what you're trying to do. But sometimes you wind up behind, and you need to pivot and be like, I need to get like specifically cast bones into blood rush twice to get over this deck, for example, and that's like the only way I can get lethal.
Okay, yeah, I think you said that very well. Like, fatigue is always going to be a consideration in this game, and the spot you should be thinking about fatigue is like before the game starts. Fat decking, at least in limited, is a strategy. It's not going to be a strategy for Mistveil, actually, right? Because in limited, I think you have to play 30 cards. I'm not exactly sure about draft yet, but at least in sealed, you have to play exactly 30. So I don't know how that's going to change some matchups or games, but that'll also be an interesting change for Mistveil.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I think fatigue will like still always exist, but it definitely will be like an interesting change, and I'm curious to see how it changes or how that goes. I think the other thing that's like pretty interesting about fatigue is that it's like how well you're doing and how to adjust your play in terms of like setting up your cards more and maximizing the individual value of each card in your deck versus playing hand to hand and maximizing the value of your current hand rather than each individual's card. When you're deciding like whether you want to do either one, it's kind of like a sliding scale, and it's like constantly shifting throughout the match, and you're constantly evaluating if you're ahead or if you're behind on fatigue. And I'm like specifically taking note of like, I have a turn. How does my opponent deal with this turn? Are they taking damage and then trading with me? Because as soon as they take damage, I'm like, you've taken damage. Like you took like 6 points of damage. That makes me care about fatigue, like, I don't know, like 10% less or like whatever. Like it's not like an actual percentage, but I'm just like, it is now like that much harder for you to fatigue me because you've just like committed to taking a bunch of damage that you didn't need to take. Or vice versa. Oh, they're blocking a lot. So that means that fatigue is on the table and I need to think about dealing with fatigue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think fatigue will be like a full episode on its own because there's going to be like math regarding like when you should be attacking with your weapons and cards in hand, pitch stack considerations, and things like that as well. Because I typically play a lot of fatigue, like constructed fatigue decks that like really prioritize like making sure reds go to the bottom of the deck. I actually ended up playtesting yesterday with some of the Strufwaffle people just randomly. It kind of wasn't planning on it. It was Oliver, I think. Was
Yeah,
like,
you were
let's
playing
play.
with Oliver.
And I'm like, oh, okay, sure. I'll play test for once in my life, and ended up playing for my first time ever KO, and ended up winning one of the games because I was able to pitch stack Command and Conquer into Command and Conquer into Command and Conquer, to end up fatiguing out the Azuri, and that felt pretty good because I was like, okay, I can still fatigue people with KO as well. So
yeah, technically true. I think you usually kill them by damage, but you technically often do have fatigue as a. They can't just only sit there and block. If they only sit there and block, they probably will fatigue to you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that might be a good segue to talk about on hits and Command and Conquer. Actually, how does on hits change value neutral play? So like, let's talk about Command and Conquer. So instead of, your option is to block for 6 or Command and Conquer for 6, how would that change your decision here?
So the big thing is that the on hit kind of in a way makes it not a value neutral play. That's not like entirely true because it's still 6 damage, and you still have the thing of like if they really wanted to block with 2 cards anyways, you do just sometimes throwing the CNC is just a value neutral play where they go, oh, I wanted to block with 2 cards, sick. I just like I get I get value out of my hand I wouldn't have otherwise gotten value out of. I'm glad that you took 6 to throw the CNC. The thing is that that is not always the case, and you also get the upside of like they actually really wanted to keep their hand, and you make their good hand worse. So you kind of like put a ceiling on their turn where it's like almost always impossible for them to like just take 6 and like send back their 4 cards. It does happen sometimes, but you're like pretty ahead on that because you usually got like 6 damage and a card in their arsenal. So then it's like not value neutral, and it's very good that you did the CNC. And on the other side, like they block 2 cards that they didn't really want to block with, and you've like then devalued their next turn. It's hard to put a number on that. I know some people like calculate afterwards and then average it for the matchup, and then they know like a CNC is worth like 5 on average in this matchup, and like that is a numbers thing that you can do. I don't actually personally really do that for disruption, but it is a numbers thing that you can do. Yeah, so CNC often ends up being good value wise because your opponent pretty much has to block or they give up tons of value, and sometimes they have like a defense reaction and they wanted to block with that defense reaction. If they have like a D react in hand and a D react in arsenal, like you really screw with their turn. You make their turn very, very bad. So that's kind of the upside of CNC, and really kind of like all hit effects is that you're getting extra value if they let it hit, so they're more encouraged to block, and then sometimes that blocking makes it significantly worse to play their turn.
Is there like a difference between things like Command and Conquer and like let's say some arrows from Azalea? Let's talk about like Red and Ledger and Remorseless, things like this. How do we value on hits in general? Like, should we try and almost always send an on hit if we can, if the play is either value neutral or yeah, let's just assume the every play here is value neutral. Do you prioritize sending on hits rather than like not sending it if possible?
I think in general, yes. The how much your opponent wants to block is like a pretty big consideration, though. I still think that's like a very, very real. Where if your opponent really wants to block 6 every hand and you're not throwing a CNC that prevents their D reacts, like sometimes taking 6 to attack for 6 or taking 5 to attack for 5 is not all that good a deal. So that is like kind of one side of it. On the other side of it, I think that there's like 2 different styles of on hits. There's the offensive ones and then the disruptive ones. So like the damage based ones, like Remorseless, you can calculate based on like how much life they lose. So it's just kind of like extra damage on that attack. So rather than being like a 5 damage attack, if they lose 3 life to Remorseless, it's like an 8 damage attack. And you probably have a rough idea of what that is, or at least like a range of what that is based on the matchup. Like KO might play like 1 to 2 cards, so the Remorseless value is worth like 1 to 2. Similarly, like Infecting Shot is worth like 2. But I'm often not valuing the on hits that highly because my opponent gets to have a chance to say like if that on hit applies or not. So like I think like a trap is like you can be like, oh, like attacking with this Infecting Shot is 7 value, and then like blocking with it and like a 3 block is only like 6 value. But like it's only 7 value if your opponent like lets it be 7 value, right? So just be like kind of careful there. So that's kind of like the value based ones. If they like draw a card, they're worth like about 3. Average card is worth about 3-ish, sometimes a little more. And Constructed Sons might be closer to like 3.5, 4.
Can I say something about Remorseless and like just like Infecting Shots?
Yeah.
As the player who typically play Fatigue and like wants to block a lot, the way that I think about it from the blocking side is when my opponent attacks with an Infecting Shot, it's actually I think of it as like my blue 3 blocks getting an extra point of block, like extra point of value when I block with it. So like, oh, like I was like thinking about loading my pistols with my blue. Now I'd rather just block it out because that gave me an extra point of value by just blocking. And at least like at least fatigue dash is like I'm usually in a position where I will win fatigue once I get to that point. So then my consideration of like deck side and stuff like that doesn't really apply. So I would almost always think of like, oh, I get to block this card out and I get extra value from it. If you're attacking with like Infecting Shot, and if they're a deck that kind of likes to block, if you can't force it through, it's like giving your opponent extra value on their block cards, or like, their sync now technically blocked for 5 points of value in quotations. It's that could be kind of devastating.
You don't like literally lose value in the sense that like if they block your fatigue shot for 5 against like dash where it doesn't do anything, let's say, or they like block your infecting shot for 5, like you haven't like lost value by sending the infecting shot instead of the fatigue shot, but you have just kind of made your opponent's blocks like that much more efficient. So just like I wouldn't factor those on hits in unless you're expecting to hit. So if you are doing it but you have a rain razors that you know about, so you're very likely to get that on hit, then all of a sudden you probably do factor that on hit in. But yeah, just be like careful about like some people just like auto assume that like everything hits, and it's just like, well, in most games of Flesh and Blood, your opponent doesn't just sit there and let you hit with everything. Or if it's a matchup where they do, then like apply that knowledge. But there's many matchups that are not like that. Even against fairly aggressive decks, they will often want to block on hits sometimes.
What about if they have like armor and stuff like that? Let's say, like Guardians typically have like Civic Steps. They could have Tech Plating, Crown of Providence, Gauntlet of Might. Like, they have a lot of armor. How do you evaluate on hits on these kinds of matchups?
I think it kind of depends like how many on hits you have. If you are like a ranger where you just have a ton of on hits, or like even like an assassin, you just like have endless on hits. It's sort of like a matter of like working through all of their armor. So in a sense, you can kind of like disregard their armor because like it's something that you have to work through eventually, and then you count the armor in the scenarios where they like don't have it, where if you're less like, is it possible for them to cover this? Oh, actually they can no longer cover this, is like when you start like really thinking about their armor, I think. So as you get to those like end games, but I think in a lot of the earlier mid game, I'm just like, maybe they use armor. If they do, I'm happy. If they block, like I'm still disrupting them, like whatever. Kind of getting what I want either way. But if you're a deck that has like, and I think this is a part of the reason we see CNC less actually, is if you're a deck like Fi and you have like minimal on hits and you're like trying to CNC a warrior, like a dual wield warrior, they can just give you the armor on that. They can probably cover like a full CNC with one of them, and then like still like half of the CNC with a card and like equipment. Or they can give you like a card and equipment like, I don't even know, like 5 times or something. So like you're just like not gonna get through their armor, and so the on hits like don't really have that big of an effect. So yeah, if you have small enough on hits that you can't really work through their fridge, the on hits are basically zero. Because if your opponent plays correctly, then they should just block. Or if you have enough to get over their fridge, then it sort of has this like incrementing value where once you've gone through all their armor, the on hits are more disruptive or more valuable.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think that also applies vice versa. This might be a good time to just say, if you are a deck with like a lot of armor and like you're considered like a fridge deck, so typically like warriors and guardians, if you're considering either blocking with your armor or taking damage, if you know they have a lot of on hits, don't use your armor, because just take the damage. Your life and your armor is kind of equivalent in most cases. Obviously not all the time, but most cases in the early game it is. So keep your armor to prevent the on hits, because you get extra value when you do prevent on hits, and it makes it harder for your opponent to, get to the state where now they're winning, because they can go like Kodachi 4, and like that's actually kind of hard to stop without armor. And if you can just use armor and stop like one of the Kodachis to prevent one, that turn is significantly worse, right? If their Mask of Momentum isn't triggering to draw them a card.
Yeah, it is. It is much worse. So you always want to have the option to block with your armor, and armor is like pretty much always better than life, as Jay said. The only real exceptions I can think of is like reckless swing. You don't want to go too low that you just die to reckless. If you go into like attack reaction range as well, like sometimes like using your armor before you're in attack reaction range is better, because like if you're too low and you can just die to an attack reaction, then like your armor is not a reaction. So you can like use your armor to like play around the attack reaction once, but you also could have just like stayed out of the range to begin with and then have a choice of when you go into that range, which is usually better.
I think we actually did an episode about equipment maybe like a year ago. I think everything we talked about there is still applies. So honestly, if you want to go through our archives and just like listen to some of just like the fundamentals episodes, I think most of the things we talked about in those episodes still do apply to, current Flesh and Blood as well.
And then so we kind of talked about like the value based on hits that have like a number attached to them that are very easy to calculate. And this even includes like things like debilitate, which is like the -2. Yes, you do count that as they get 2 more value out of their attack, assuming that you were planning to attack yourself. I guess if you're not planning to attack, the on hit doesn't have a value. But yeah, you just count the numerical value for that. And then the ones that get tricky are the ones like Command and Conquer, or the disruptive ones that actually like take away cards or prevent things, like Spinal Crush prevents Go Again, Red in the Ledger prevents Go Again. Those cards put a cap on your opponent's turn. What the cap is sort of depends on like what the hit effect is and what your opponent's deck is doing. But like even if it's just like a pummel that makes them discard, or like a CNC that takes their arsenal away, like you're putting them onto like a 4-card hand. So you say like the best thing you can do is whatever your deck's best 4-card hand is, rather than a 5-card hand. And against some decks, like Katsu, for example, who's trying to like essentially combo you out, or like have a turn so big that like they're so far ahead that they win the game from there effectively, it's hard to do that with 4 cards. So you're kind of like prolonging the time. Like you're making it so like not only do they need to line up that hand, but they need to line up that hand when you don't Command and Conquer them, which makes it significantly harder. So that's like part of the reason that card's so effective in a ninja. Surprise, they also don't have armor, so the on hits are also more effective as well. So those like limiting ones are really good for like decreasing the range of what your opponent can do, and they're a little harder to calculate and are a little more like matchup dependent, I guess.
Yeah. So something like Red and Ledger is a good example. Even if that card hits against a Guardian, like they still do the one action that they were gonna do anyways. So like the on hit in Red and Ledger against Guardians kind of don't exist. I guess unless they play like tectonic plating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then vice versa. If you play against a ninja, like their 1-card hand can be like the best thing is like a 5 from Surging Strike and loses Go Again.
That's a 2-card hand though.
Sorry, like a one action hand.
Oh, one action. Yeah. You really put a limit on what your opponent can actually do, and it's like super. It can be super valuable. Yeah, I guess the other thing that we haven't talked about with on hits is there's also a consideration of like, if we talked about if your opponent wants to block, I think there's also a consideration of if you want your opponent to block. This again is like kind of like matchup and game state dependent, but if I was going to give an example, when I am playing, let's say like I'm playing KO into an aggressive deck like Katsu, I want Katsu to block. If Katsu is blocking, even if it's like improving the value of their hand or whatever, I'm still happy because it means I'm not getting bonds comboed, right? So like if they're blocking, I'm happy. And I kind of want to play the game in a way where they keep blocking and they keep being incentivized to block, because I know that like my value, like I just have better small hands, right? Like I can just like bare fangs. I can like get an agility token, go like swing big, tunic counter, pack hunt for like 14 off of 3 cards. And like nothing Katsu can do off of 3 cards can compete with that. He needs 5-card hands. So like there's also a consideration sometimes of like you want your opponent to block, and on hits are very good if you want your opponent to be blocking. If the states where your opponent keeps blocking and giving you cards favor you, which is often the case with control decks, then your on hits are really good into those decks, and you're really prioritizing them. So that's kind of like the other side, is if you get benefit out of your opponent blocking and you know that it's like hard for them to win the game when they're giving you multiple cards, your on hits are very good in those situations.
Anything else about on hits? I'm kind of like, I think I said everything I wanted to say about on hits.
Maybe the very last tool that we can talk about for evaluating like some of these on hits and these value neutral plays is, I think most of the time you're wanting to assign numbers to it, and if you can assign a numerical value to it, that's probably the way to go. However, there's also kind of like game state comparison things of like you can like think of the like different scenarios like let's say that we're at like 30 life, our opponent's at 24 life, we're being attacked for 6 and you're deciding do I block for 6 and attack for 6 or do I or sorry, do I block for 6 or do I take 6 and attack for 6? So you can kind of like go through the scenarios and be like they take 6, so like you take 6 and they take 6, so then the life totals are 18 to 24 but they have a 5 card hand, or they block 6, so then the life totals are 24 to 24 and they have a 3 card hand, or you do the other one where you're not the one attacking, you're the one blocking, you block 6, so the life totals are 24 to 30 and they have a 5 card hand. And you can kind of like think about those three scenarios and be like which ones am I happy in, or which ones do I think favor me the most, and that can be like another way to kind of evaluate some of these situations, and evaluate even things like on hits. So like this is where the like you want them to block kind of comes in. There's like times where it's like hard to tell if you want them to block, and like one of the things you can think about is like if they have a 3 card hand, am I happy with that? And the answer could be, well, their best 3 card hand in their deck is Spinal Crush. I have 6 armor. I have a Blood Rush and an Agility, so I know I can just like buy a Blood Rush turn if they're on a 3 card hand. So I'm very happy if they block. That's like sort of an example, but I think that these like thinking about the game state and like the different life totals and comparing them is like another kind of advanced tool. But when the value is equal, that's kind of what I'm thinking about is the game state.
There's a lot of things to consider when looking at value in neutral plays. So like on hits, fatigue, game state. Like there's no clear answer to like if you should do one or the other, and it's gonna depend on your situation. But at least our hope is that we gave you like the tools that you can use to at least work through what you should be thinking of, so then you can make the right decision and improve your game.
And I find it's often a matter of like is often like a matter of like identifying like what that current game is about in that current moment. So like because like often these things are like kind of competing, the like do you want your opponent to block, or like are you worried about fatigue, like those things can compete with each other and can change depending on the type of game that you're playing. And so kind of identifying at any given point that this game is not at risk of fatigue, I should be playing a value game, versus this game is at risk of fatigue, I should be taking a longer game and more setup-y game, is like super, super, super important. And yeah, hopefully the heuristics do help you navigate some of that, because it's like one of the more nuanced things in Flesh and Blood, and I think it's like one of the hardest aspects of the game is like the kind of push and pull between fatigue and value.
Yeah, it's honestly like a different way of like saying that would probably be like, what is your win condition? There are multiple win conditions in this game, and can you win before you run out of cards in your deck? And if you can't, how do you win? And if you play just the value game, some decks are just doing that better than your decks. So you just need to know what your win conditions are for that game, and you have to make sure you play towards it. And throughout the game, that win condition can change.
Mm-hmm.
You could be a deck where that typically never gets to fatigue your opponent, but then just because of how the cards came up or how both players ended up playing, fatigue might become a real issue. It's kind of hard to say without actually going through the whole game, but like even if it's an aggro mirror, it might just come down to fatigue. And I've seen things like that happen where like, both aggro players kind of just like drew like 4 red hands back to back to back, and then like they're swinging very mediocre numbers at each other, and then both players blocking a little bit more. They both have like 6 cards left in their deck, and they're like, huh, what do we do now?
Yeah, it is very interesting how like things can be fluid and shift. And it's one of the most interesting things about this game to me, honestly, is that kind of like constantly evaluating the game state and like what is going on, what is important. Can I play towards just outvaluing here? Do I need to push it and try and get a winning end game? Do I need to try and get lucky? Do I need to stretch out the games so that you run out of threats and my second cycle's better? There's just like so many different competing factors and competing avenues to win the game, and you're kind of needing to correctly navigate and assess like which one at any given time is dominant, right? Where like if I just play a value game here, I can't lose. But you need to be able to identify that in the spot that is the case, and it's not always easy to do.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Anything else you want to talk about this topic?
I don't think so. I don't think there's really too much else to cover. I think we covered all of our points pretty well. Bit of a longer episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you got something out of it. If you have questions for us and you want to get in touch, please do so. You can do so on social media. We have Twitter. I'm at Yukili Bender and Jay is at Ueda J. That's UEDA and JAY. Or you can email us directly at onthebobble@gmail.com and send your questions there. You can also reach us through the Patreon Discord. Shout out to our patrons. I don't know if we actually did this at the top of the show, but we really do appreciate you. We've been seeing some new faces come in as well recently, which is cool to see. And there's some new content out. All the kind of information you need about Savage Sash KO, who I think is the deck I would be playing at Armory. Sorry, not at Armory, at PQs this week if I had PQs to go to, but we have no local PQs, and the closest one is like a 7-hour drive, and I don't really want to drive 7 hours for a PQ. So yeah, I'm not going to do that, but I think that KO very, very good. And if you want, sideboard guide, article, all that kind of stuff, it is up on the Patreon on thebobble.com/Patreon. So yeah, you can reach us through our Discord if you wish. All right, that's going to wrap us up. Thanks for listening, and until next time, hope you all have good luck at your PQs.
Okay, sign off. I guess I'll talk about what I did on Sunday. So, instead of playing ProQuest on Sunday, I actually ended up playing Weiss Schwartz Teams event in Vancouver. I ended up top 8ing that event.
Nice.
Me and my friends were all playing like strictly tier 3 or worse. I was playing some kind of deck I built like 4 years ago or 3 years ago. And then, I guess I can talk about the deck for the people who knows. I was playing only set 1 DAO, Data Live, and that deck got banned when it came out, and it never got removed from the ban list, even though the deck is no longer close to as powerful as, that it should be banned. But please, somebody that works at Bushiroad, unban those cards because it's not as degenerate as it used to be. If they unban it now, it's like the same power level as like, top tier decks now. So please just unban it. It's fine. There's nothing wrong. Other than that, our teammates played Mushoku Tensei, which was tier maybe like 4 years ago as well. And then our third teammate played Kobayashi, Dragon Maid Kobayashi, which on release the deck was kind of awful, and it still is kind of awful. But you know what? We played 3 awful decks and made top 8, so that was a fun weekend.
It's kind of sad that Dragon Maid is a bad deck. I like that show. That show's so funny.
Yeah, it's a good slice of life, but as a Weiss Schwartz deck, that deck does kind of nothing. It's yeah, they're missing power cards, they're missing big beaters, they're missing everything. But
Jay
what?
was trying to get me to play Weiss with Dragon Maid. He's like, "You want Dragon Maid deck?"
Yeah, look,
it didn't work. He didn't tell me it was bad either. He's just like, "Do you want Dragon Maid deck? I can get you Dragon Maid deck," and I'm like, maybe.
No. You know what the good thing about a deck being bad? That means the deck is super cheap.
Oh,
yeah.
True,
so like you can pick up a deck for like $80 or something like that. And it's Weiss Schwartz.
Favorite reason to buy a deck.
But like it's like White Swords is a game where it doesn't matter how bad your deck is. If you get lucky enough, you can win your games. So like
Mm.
good example for us is like right now the best White Schwartz deck is typically considered to be Chainsaw Man, and Chainsaw Man is just like a very consistent. It's just a very consistent deck that like does big damage at the end of the game. Um, but like every single round we played against like a team with like Chainsaw Man in it. Maybe there was like one round where there was a team without Chainsaw Man in it, but like we beat through all those decks to make top eight. So
Yeah, sometimes you just win the bad matchup, right? Or sometimes you lose the bad matchup and then like your other two decks just win, so it doesn't matter.
exactly. Like, and we're playing all bad decks, but it's fine. You just have to play very solid and good. And White Schwartz is a game that really, really like it doesn't matter what cards you're playing. Like you can win games even if you're as long as you're playing very solid fundamental, you know, deck thinning White Shorts, making sure you have like the highest chance to cancel, making sure that you're applying the right amount of pressure at the right on the right turns, doing all the right plays, you have like a 40% chance to win the game. It's like the damage is random in that game. So um for better
Damage
or
is
for worse.
random. Yeah, that was always such a mechanic in that game. The random damage where you don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
That is something that strikes me about other card games whenever I play them. Is just like some of the inherent variance is tough.
yeah, imagine if you're like you attack for 6 with Command and Conquer, but then your opponent might take 6 or they might take 0. Like it's random.
Yeah, you like roll a die.
Yeah, basically. It's like rolling scab skins every turn.
Oh boy, so fun.
Uh,
Yeah,
It's not
it's
that bad, but like, the game that actually like rolled the D6s from Bushiroad disappeared. It was called Dragonborn. That game was if you rolled 3 6s, you typically couldn't lose. It was very hard to lose. Um,
hmm.
but that game disappeared, so too much variance is not good. But a little bit of variance. Actually, let's rephrase. A lot of variance is sometimes good for a game.
Yeah,
You know,
people generally like variants. I think that even though Flesh and Blood is a low variance card game, it's still a card game. I think like there is a lot of games are decided by how well you draw in Flesh and Blood when when everything is equal. Like if you're playing like two players, you have equal skill and are like roughly equal matchup, it's like very often down to draws. In fact, like almost entirely down to draws. So there is that. It's just that like if one player is making mistakes, they get really punished for the mistakes. So I think that's like some of like the low variance aspects of Fab.
yeah, there's a lot of skill expression in Fab. It's
Mm-hmm.
the difference between like the difference between draws, like how your deck draws, can be like 5 or 6 points of damage or like value, but you can easily make that up by like playing better than your opponent, right?
Yeah, yeah. But then if your opponent plays perfectly, it's like up to the draws again. So it's like kind of interesting. Like I think that Flesh and Blood is like more random than people think it is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
It's just that it often gets covered up by like skill difference can completely cover it up. Is like sort of like the weird thing about Flesh and Blood. But there is still like inherent variance into your draws.
Yeah, I agree with you. I
Because
agree
if
with
there
you.
wasn't like you think about like a 50-50 matchup, you would just win that matchup all the time or lose that matchup all the time if it was purely skill, right? But you don't. And it's because there's like a fair bit of variance in your draws. I guess there's also like mistakes, like that is like also part of it. But I think a lot of it is attributable to how well you draw. So it's interesting. All card games have variance. Variance is pretty fun. I think sometimes people like respond negatively to certain types of variance though. I'm generally okay with variants, except for Clash. I hate Clash.
Yeah. Variance. I kind of like. I like variance. Like I like gambling in general. There are just feels bad variants and feels good variants. Typically, things that stay in casinos are feels good variants, and you know things that don't make it to the main, the mainstream is feels bad variants. So I think Clash feels like a feels bad variance. Spinning $100 on a roulette wheel feels like a feels good variance. I don't know. I guess it depends on the person too.
Yeah, I think it often depends how much you feel like you're losing something versus how much you feel like when you win, you're winning something. Because like sometimes you do something and you're like, it just feels like I lose. It's like either I get the thing that I want or I lose, or then like sometimes it's just like, I don't know, when I win, it's like very good.
Yeah, you know what Clash should have been? Clash should have been like you reveal 2 cards off the top or 3 cards off the top of your deck, and if all 3 of those cards was bigger than your opponent's 1 card, then you got like 3 might tokens or something like that. But if like any of them lost, you just like didn't get anything.
So it's just more variance.
So it's like more variance, but when you hit, you get a lot more. But when you don't hit, you don't get anything. So
I
like
think
on
I think
average, you don't
Clash
get
would
anything.
feel I think Clash would feel less bad if your opponent didn't also get it. I guess it'd just be broken. I guess Clash of Might, if your opponent could never get the Might, would just be like broken, or like Test of Might. You're
Yeah,
just like,
yeah.
here's a 0 for 4 that like gives me something. So I guess what I'm describing would like not feel bad, but it would also just be a busted card.
Yeah. But then all you have to do is make the requirement to get the might token a lot harder.
Mm, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I think a lot of what feels bad is your opponent getting something. It's very like, yay, my card chose my opponent and they won because of it.
Okay. You wanna wrap it up here before we ramble on for too long?
Yeah,
All right.
probably about time. Have a good night, everyone.
Hey, good night, everyone.